My name is Amira, and when it all happened, I was still just a Saudi girl, born within the walls of a golden palace, but a prisoner of something much crueler than bars: fear. From a young age, I grew up surrounded by luxury, imported rugs, servants who attended to me, and a silence that screamed inside my soul. The palace was enormous, but the emptiness in me was greater. They taught me I had everything but never explained why. With everything money could buy, my heart remained hungry. When I opened my eyes in the morning, I felt I was living in a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside but lifeless on the inside. And it was inside this suffocating silence that the first spark of true faith began to be born. From the age of 5, I was taught to memorize the Quran with military precision. Every gesture, every word, every prayer, everything watched, controlled, repeated without soul. By 12, I had already memorized more than half of Islam's holy book. But while my lips pronounced verses in Arabic, my heart cried out for something I didn't understand. During prayers, my body bowed before Allah, but my mind asked questions no one could hear. Why do I feel so empty? Why do these words seem so cold? I saw people being punished in the squares for doubting, and they taught me that even thinking differently was a sin. But it was in this desert of fear that a name began to echo inside me. A forbidden name, but one that brought me peace. Jesus. And it was when I opened a hidden Bible for the first time that the impossible began. From sunrise until the golden lanterns went out, my life seemed like a perfect painting. But each stroke hid a shadow. I grew up surrounded by everything gold could buy except what the soul needs most: freedom. The curtains in my room were silk, but they were also invisible bars. The silence inside the palace was so thick I could almost touch it. Everything was rigid, calculated, impeccable. The maids whispered when they passed by, and the sound of their sandals echoed through the cold marble. I learned from an early age that fear was the language of power, and that smiling too much could be a sin. Even as a child, I felt something was wrong, something that burned inside me, a question no one answered. Why? If I have everything, do I feel so empty? At 5 years old, my father hired the best religious tutors. Each morning before the sun warmed the sands, I was already kneeling before the verses of the Quran. My small hands followed the movement of adults, repeating words I didn't understand, like a doll taught to speak without knowing what she was saying. Perfection, the masters said. But a child's heart feels when something isn't true. With each lesson, my body obeyed, but my soul fell silent a little more. By 12, I had already memorized more than half of the holy book. And yet I woke up every morning with a heavy chest, as if a desert had grown inside me. The palace gleamed under the sun, but inside me, there was only darkness. The sound of prayers echoed through the hallways 5 times a day, and I, even reciting each word with perfection, felt distant. I knelt on the cold carpet, bowed my head to the ground, but instead of peace, I felt an emptiness that hurt. It was as if each gesture, each ritual, was a soulless repetition. There were days when I looked at the sky through my bedroom window and imagined that there was something beyond, something greater than fear, greater than the rules, even greater than the golden walls that surrounded me. And it was in this silence of my heart that the first thread of light began to move. It was so light it seemed like the touch of the wind, but I knew something was calling me, something different. And it's here, before this story continues, that I want to ask you something simple but profound. If you feel, as I once felt, that there's something beyond what your eyes see, if you believe that God still speaks, still transforms, still enters cells and the deserts of the soul, then hit that subscribe button now. Not as someone clicking on a video, but as someone taking a step of faith. Here, each word is a seed, and whoever plants faith harvests miracles. May this story not only be heard but lived inside you. While the sound of the desert lulled my nights, I began to notice something strange. The wind, when it passed through the windows, seemed to murmur a song I didn't know. Sometimes I found myself standing still, with my hand over my heart, trying to understand what I felt. It was as if a gentle presence was watching me with love, but love was a forbidden word. No one spoke about feelings in my house, only about duty, and the more they tried to mold me, the more I felt like glass about to crack. Until, amid that silence, a spark of faith began to shine inside me. I didn't know it yet, but it was the beginning of the greatest miracle of my life. Time passed, and with it, my soul began to grow restless. Each prayer I made seemed to rise and fall to the ground at the same time, as if the words hit an invisible ceiling. I saw people around me bowing, repeating the same phrases, the same gestures, the same empty looks. And inside me, something screamed in silence. I was 12 years old, but I already felt old, tired of pretending faith, tired of following rules that seemed like walls. Sometimes I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. I saw a girl in expensive clothes, but with no shine in her eyes. I felt as if something inside me had died without ever having lived. That's when I began to ask questions, dangerous questions. Why do I feel this emptiness? Why, if God is love, do I only know fear? These words were never spoken out loud. I just thought them, and even so, I feared the wind would carry them to someone. One night, while walking through the palace corridors, I heard low voices coming from the kitchen. It was one of the maids, a foreign woman who spoke of something called the gospel. I hid behind the door and heard a phrase that made time stop. Jesus loves even those the world rejects. That pierced through me like light in a dark room. Love? I whispered, not understanding the weight of the word. No one had ever talked to me about love, only about duty. And it was at that moment that a thirst was born inside me. I needed to discover who this Jesus was who dared to love those no one loved. Days later, I found a small Bible, hidden among the linen fabrics. When I touched that book, something inside me moved. The pages smelled of hope, and the words, even in a strange language, seemed alive. I read quietly, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I cried. It was the first time I felt that God heard me, not out of obligation, but out of love. There, alone, in the silence of dawn, something happened. The fear that held me began to crack, like ice melting under the sun. For the first time I felt peace, a peace that didn't come from the world nor from the rules, but from a name. Jesus. I didn't know it. But at that moment, the simple act of opening that Bible was the beginning of a heavenly revolution. Each word I read was like fire burning the chains of fear. Love began to invade spaces where before there was only blind obedience. And when I closed the book, something inside me was no longer the same. I felt freedom. A freedom that couldn't be taken away even with the king's orders or the weight of the laws. From that point on, my life would never be the same. And if it were you at that moment, if God asked you to remain firm when everything seems lost, what would you do? Write here in the comments, "I choose to trust God." Because every word of faith declared here becomes a prayer, and every sincere prayer is a seed that heaven makes bloom. That night, I trembled. The walls of my room seemed to close in, as if the palace itself was trying to hide what I was about to do. The lights were out, and the only flame that illuminated the room came from a small oil lamp. I held the Bible against my chest, with my heart beating so hard it seemed to scream. Every sound, every step in the corridor, every sigh made me fear being discovered. But at the same time, something stronger than fear kept me there. Hunger for truth. I opened the book, and the soft sound of the pages sounded like freedom. The first words I read were, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I didn't fully understand, but I felt something course through my body, a living presence, a silent voice that said, "You are not alone." With each page, I saw myself before a God who didn't demand perfection, but offered love. A God who listened, who forgave, who called each person by name. I cried over those pages like someone watering a seed hidden in the earth. It seemed impossible, but I felt that book was speaking to me. And the more I read, the more the world around me began to crumble. The palace gold lost its shine, the laws lost their meaning, and everything that before seemed great became small before the immensity of Christ's love. I knew that if anyone discovered what I was doing, the punishment would be terrible. But for the first time, I was willing to risk everything, because something inside me was finally alive. For weeks I hid the Bible under my pillow. I always read at night when everyone was asleep. Sometimes my maid, the same one who had spoken Jesus' name, stood guard at the door. She smiled in silence like someone who knew the value of what I was discovering. On one of those dawns I read the verse that would change everything. You will know the truth and the truth will set you free. I closed my eyes and asked in tears, Jesus, if you are the truth, free me from fear. That simple request transformed the air around me. The room became filled with a peace I cannot explain with words. It was as if heaven itself had descended to embrace me. But the enemy cannot stand it when light invades darkness. One morning, returning from the courtyard, I found my room ransacked. Clothes thrown around, the pillow torn and on the floor. The Bible open. My heart froze. I heard my father's heavy footsteps approaching and his voice, firm as steel, echoed through the corridor. Amira, what is this? When he entered, his gaze was full of fury and shame. He held the book with disgust, as if it were fire. This is forbidden. You've stained our family name. The guards were called. The doors closed. And at that moment I realized the price of faith would be high. Perhaps my own life. As they led me through the corridors, I no longer cried. Fear was still there, but there was something greater. A certainty. I knew I wasn't alone. Inside me, a gentle voice repeated, Fear not, for I am with you. And even handcuffed, I felt a freedom no one could take away. Faith was no longer just an idea. It was a living force, a flame that fear couldn't extinguish. If this story has been speaking to you, if God's Spirit is touching your heart now, know, this is how He calls His own. This is how He transforms lives. The same Jesus who entered my room that night wants to enter your life today. Let Him speak. Let Him heal. And if you believe that truth sets free, write in the comments, Lord, I open my heart. Because every time someone declares this, heaven moves. The sun rose red over the desert when the palace gates opened. I was dragged by guards to the great hall where my father waited. His gaze, once full of pride, was now cold and distant. Around him, religious leaders and advisors murmured words I barely understood. In the center, among them, the Bible, the same book that had given me life, was now treated as a weapon. You brought shame to our house, Amira, he said with a heavy voice. You abandoned the faith of your ancestors, shamed our family name. I tried to explain, tried to say I had found peace, that I had felt God's love for the first time. But every word of mine was met with shouts and accusations. Blasphemy, some shouted. Apostasy, another bellowed. And the verdict was given before I could even breathe. Death penalty. I was taken to a dark, damp cell, far from everything I once knew. The walls exuded fear and loneliness. The floor was cold, and the silence seemed to have weight. But there, in that darkness, something sacred happened. I closed my eyes and for the first time spoke with Jesus like someone speaking with a friend. Lord, if I have to die, let it be for you. Just don't leave me alone. And at that moment, the impossible happened. A soft light filled the space. It wasn't the light of a lamp, but a living presence. I didn't see a face, but I felt the warmth of a love that enveloped me completely. And I heard inside me a voice that wasn't from earth. Fear not, for I have chosen you. The following days were a test of faith. With each sound of footsteps, I imagined it was the final moment. But instead of fear, I felt peace. I sang softly the psalms I had read, and each verse seemed to strengthen my spirit. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? This became my shield. And so, on the day of execution, when they called me out, I walked without trembling. The sun burned. The desert seemed to watch. Soldiers surrounded the site, and a silent crowd waited for the end of the one who dared to love a forbidden God. My father was there, looking from afar, with eyes full of anger and pain. The judge raised his hand and declared, "Let the sentence be carried out." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Jesus, into your hands I commit my spirit. But before anything could happen, heaven roared. Thunder cut through the air and a storm began to form, coming from nowhere in the heart of the desert. Strong winds lifted the sand. The horses became frightened, and the soldiers stepped back. A light descended from heaven and illuminated the ground in front of me. Everyone screamed, some fell to their knees. It was as if God himself had placed his hand between me and death. When everything calmed down, I was standing, alive. The judge, pale, murmured, "This is a sign." The execution was canceled and I was released that same afternoon. I walked out of the gate with a weak body but a spirit on fire. Jesus didn't just save me from death, he gave me a new purpose. From that day on, I knew my mission was to tell what he did. And if it were you at that moment, if the world rose up against your faith, would you remain firm? Today I want to invite you to do something simple but powerful. Write in the comments, "I choose to remain with Jesus." Because every word of faith you declare is a seed of courage that heaven waters with power. The sun was setting over the desert, and the sky seemed divided between fire and hope. I walked in silence with bare feet and a heart still pulsing the name that had freed me. Jesus. The wind hit my face, lifting grains of sand that seemed to dance in the golden light of dusk. I didn't know where to go, but I knew who was guiding me. Behind me, the palace that was once a prison was now just a distant memory. Before me, vastness. I felt small, fragile, but free. The girl who once feared dying now lived a miracle. And the most impressive thing was that the miracle wasn't just in what happened, it was in what changed inside me. For weeks I walked from city to city, hiding my identity. Sometimes I slept in travelers' tents. Other times under the starry sky, talking with God like someone conversing with a friend. I no longer needed carpets or golden walls. Each cold night was a reminder that he was with me. I saw God's care in small details. A piece of bread offered by a stranger, a stream hidden in the desert, a child who smiled at me without knowing who I was. Each gesture was a voice saying, "I sustain you." That's how I learned that miracles aren't just rays of light from heaven, but also the invisible hands that hold us, when all we have is faith. One afternoon, while resting near an oasis, I heard a group of people singing. The voices were simple, but there was something in them that made me cry. They were hidden Christians, gathered in secret. When they saw me, they hesitated. After all, I still wore the clothes of a Saudi princess. But before I said anything, a woman approached and whispered, "You were chosen." And she hugged me, as if she already knew me. That hug was worth more than any crown. They welcomed me, took care of my wounds, and taught me to pray in freedom. That night, kneeling on the warm sand, I accepted Jesus publicly, even knowing the danger that meant. And when I finished praying, a gentle breeze blew. It was as if heaven itself smiled. The years passed, and the miracle of liberation became mission. Today, I tell this story not so you'll admire my courage, but so you'll realize the power of the God who transforms the impossible into liberation. I, a girl condemned to death, was saved by the one who defeated death itself. I, who lived in a palace of fear, now live free in love. Each scar became a testimony, each tear a seed of faith, and the same voice that called me in that cold cell still calls today. Maybe your name is next. How many times have you felt imprisoned, not by chains but by fear, sadness, guilt, or doubts? How many times have you looked at the sky in silence, waiting for a sign? The same God who freed me wants to do something in your life now. He still speaks, still acts, still enters the prisons of the soul and transforms despair into hope. It doesn't matter what they said about you, or how deep you fell. Jesus still does the impossible. He still walks on the waters of your tears, still opens doors where only walls exist, still transforms sentences into beginnings. And if you feel this message is for you, close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath and pray with me. Lord Jesus, enter my story as you entered Amira's. Where there is fear, place courage. Where there is guilt, place forgiveness. Where there is silence, speak to me. I want to know you truly. Feel your living presence inside me. I give you my heart, my pain, and my hope. Make me a miracle. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. If this prayer touched your heart, don't let this moment pass. Declare your faith right now. Write in the comments, Jesus has power over my life. Every word of faith written here is like a flame that rises to heaven, and each flame lights another. May the God who transformed my desert into an altar also transform your life into a living testimony of Christ's power. And remember, the same God who saved me from death can today save you from despair. He still does. He still speaks. And when he acts, nothing can stop him.